Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast. I am Ramon Mejia. I'm ready to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. This week is episode number 183 of the show, and I have 5 new LitRPG reviews just for you folks at home, and of course some great LitRPG news, stuff that's coming out in the near future, all kinds of great stuff for you this episode. The 5 reviews that I'm going to be giving you this week are going to be for Shadow Sun Expansion. After that, it'll be NPC Lives, book number 1, Tales from the Dead Man Inn. This is a collection of short stories by the author Daniel Shinofin set in the Alpha World universe. Also out is going to be Invasion, book number 1, Second Chance, which is I'm going to give you a review for that one. And also, let's see. Then after that, it'll be Still Ain't Dead, The Ex-Wife Odyssey, book number 1. And finally, The World Dungeon, book number 1, A New Dungeon Mind, which is very much advertising as LitRPG. So there you go. All kinds of stuff for you to this week. Before we get to that, we're going to go into LitRPG news.
Boom.
And in LitRPG news, we're going to begin with Project Alpha, book number 2. The audiobook for that just came out a few days ago. Full disclosure, I wrote that. Helped produce the audiobook on that, and I'm super proud of how it turned out. The audiobook sounds amazing. The story itself is a real-life LitRPG story. It's action, adventure, dungeon diving, real-life application of those RPG skills. The nice power progression also has this nice, mysterious criminal arc thing going on. I don't want to spoil it. But just to celebrate that it actually came out as an audiobook finally, which actually turnaround was a little faster this time than it has been in the past. I made a trailer, and so here it is. Enjoy.
Boom. The grenade I fire goes off with explosive force, scattering the cemetery dirt and cracking the surrounding headstones. The tenacious group of undead soldiers trying to flank my group is blown apart. Their bone bodies splinter and break. Pieces of their gray uniforms and their weapons go flying, and multiple red 20s float away from them. Even if the single grenade did not destroy all the skeletons, I've bought us a desperately needed moment of respite. We've been in this dungeon for about a week, cutting our way through wave after wave of undead and searching for the dungeon boss controlling it. An independent scouting group found the dungeon in Atlanta, Georgia, and then sold the information to the outfit I work for, Monster Squashers, Inc. The dungeon has been feeding off political and social unrest, growing in power, and sending out an invisible miasma of negative energy that's been making regional conflicts worse within the city. Our job as dungeon divers is to destroy the source of the conflict and help bring a measure of peace back to the area. It doesn't hurt that we also get a ton of XP and credits for our work.
Okay, there we go. So that's the trailer. Definitely go check it out if you want to help support the podcast. It's fun story. Also, in LitRPG news, we have a live stream this week from Dakota Crowd and James Hunter. They did a live stream through the Divine Dungeons Facebook page, led by Dakota Crowd. They talked about their joint project, The Bibliomancer, which is a story that's coming out later this year. We have an actual date in the upcoming LitRPG section. But they talk about that and a bunch of other stuff. Go check out the live stream if you haven't had a chance to look at it. It's really entertaining. Both those guys are great writers, and I'm actually generally super excited to kind of see what they do as a collaborative process. It gets hard to write with other people. The story itself is taking place in the Completionist Chronicles universe, which is Dakota Crowd's series. So I'm curious to see what each author brings to the table. But I like both the writing, so I don't doubt that it's going to be enjoyable. Also, quick shout out to Dave Wilmarth, whose latest novel, Shadow Sun Expansion, is doing great on Amazon. It had a good launch, but it just in the last couple of days, it hit the top 200s on Amazon's best paid list, so that's really good. In case you don't know, we always like to celebrate when an author does well in our genre, just because when one author does well, it puts out the call to other people who get interested in our genre, and so it's good for everybody. So we, of course, want to celebrate when things go well for our friends and authors. So congratulations, Dave, on those good numbers. Pulling in good numbers, man. Okay, that's it for the news section. We have stuff that's coming out now that I haven't had a chance to review, and that includes Hero Go Champion is playing book number 3. Also out right now, this very instant, is The Fifth Realms by Michael Chatfield. He's not only published on Amazon, but also on Kobo. We have both links in the show notes. Also out is the 4th book in the Idle System series. I've enjoyed every single one of those novels. They're always a little quirky and weird, and their RPG system, progression system, is a little bit different, and it modifies itself every single book, so it's always an interesting read. Also out right now is Aurora's Rift, Celestial Arcanist, book number 1. This one isn't directly advertising as LitRPG. I think they put LitRPG in their tag when they published it, but look into the story. It is LitRPG. Haven't had a chance to read it fully, but has levels and whatever. So I'll have to wait and see what actually content is, but it is LitRPG. Also out is When Hell Froze, Bloody Benny, book number 1. Out as an LitRPG story. So there you go. New LitRPG audiobooks, of course, also out. Project Alpha book number 2, which you mentioned already. Full disclosure again, I wrote that. I had a good time writing it. Hope you guys have a chance. Good time reading it and listening to it. Also, the 4th book in the Endless Alliance series is out as an audiobook. Stuart Gross's Rules-Free VR MMO Life. Omnibus book number 2, which is volumes 5 through 8 of that series, is also an audiobook. Just remember that this is a darker story. I think the author says it's supposed to be the, I forget if it's chaotic evil or neutral evil, but that's like what the character is supposed to be. So just FYI. Brooding Gate Online, Vindication, the Alchemic Weaponer, is out as an audiobook as well, read by Vikas Adam, if you're a fan of his or the story. The story itself didn't quite work for me personally. It kind of covers a lot of the same events that happen in the first book of the Brooding Gate Online series. This is the Brooding Gate Online side series, but it's told from the perspective of a different character. There are some new events, of course, but for me, it's just like, okay, I kind of heard of this, but a lot of other people have really enjoyed it, so definitely go give it a listen, a sample, to see if you're one of those people. In upcoming LitRPG, we have stuff that's coming out in the near future. I'll read this off to you. There's just a list of stuff. Eden's Gate Ascent it is going to be out on August the 10th. The Ball of Light Evolution is going to be out next week on August the 12th. On the 12th as well, it'll be Dungeons of the Crooked Mountains, Underdog, book number 1. This one is new to the list. Out on, I think I conflated this. This says September the 13th. I'm going to have to double check that. But yeah, it's Carrie Summer stuff. LitRPG Adventure Stonehaven League, book number 6. It might mean August the 13th there. I'll have to double check that. On August the 15th, it'll be Scamps and Scoundrels, a LitRPG game-led adventure, The Bad Guys, book number 1. On August 22nd, it'll be Dragonheart Iron Will, the second book in that series. August 30th, Galacticon, book number 3. August 31st, Zone of Valkyria. August 31st as well, Darkness Named, Darkness Online, book number 1. September the 2nd, Game of Villains, World of Kara, book number 1. September the 6th, Cliffs of Eldamar, the second book in that series. September the 9th, Blood of Fate, Rule 99, book number 1. On September the 10th, it'll be Gloominess, book number 2. September 17th, that collaboration between James Hunter and Dakota Craft we mentioned earlier, Bibliomancer, it'll be out on September the 17th. So a bit over a month from now. On September the 19th, Skulls of Atlantis will be out. The second book in the first song series will be out sometime in September, according to the author, Blaze Corbin, and his co-author, Outspan Foster. The August the 3rd, Quest for Power, LitRPG Saga, Hero Online, book number 1. And I remembered where I'd seen this cover art before. This is actually the cover art for the Idle System, book number 2 in that series. So they actually have the same cover right there. So that's what it bugged me last week when I recognized the cover art from somewhere. I just couldn't place it then, so I had to go look it up. October the 6th will be Dungeons of the Gods, Legends Online, book number 2. And October the 21st is going to be NPC Path, book number 3, Dead Man's Retinue. So there we go. All the stuff that I know is coming out in the near future for you guys to plan your purchasing and publishing schedules around. Okay, on to new releases and reviews. And first up this week is going to be Shadow Sun Expansion, written by Dave Wilmarth. It is 465 pages. It is $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. The human race has become nearly extinct. Alistair and his small group push to make themselves stronger, fighting to survive the year-long stabilization. Forced to battle increasingly stronger and more deadly monsters, they work to expand their holdings, learn better spells, and gather resources to improve their crafting. Dungeons must be cleared and dragons defeated. Fellow survivors are found, some friendly, some hostile. Alistair considers every life precious, but when it becomes a case of kill or be killed, hard choices must be made. And each day brings them closer to the invasion of Earth. So there you go. Good description. There's a little bit more of an emphasis on the human versus human kind of combat thing going on in the expansion series here, so probably a bigger emphasis there than I would say is in the description. Full disclosure, I received an advanced copy of this novel. I purchased it when it became available. I had it on pre-order. The review portion is really easy. There are some authors whose works I kind of already know I'm going to enjoy. This is the second book in the series. I enjoyed the heck out of book number 1. I enjoyed book number 2 even more. This is a really good RPG apocalypse story. It has action, adventure, and it kind of expands from the smaller story of book number 1 into a larger story. That's the name, expansion. It neatly kind of ends the first arc of, I think, the series, where I don't want to spoil things. The novel description does say that the approach of the end of the first year is happening, so I'll leave it at that. But like the story does kind of at least conclude that particular portion of the story. In the novel, the main character and his group are trying to consolidate their ever-shrinking human population and keep it as much Earth as they can. There's a good battle in the story, very bad humans that have to be dealt with, and some good kingdom building. I think that's probably the part that expands the most in the story. While it was shown in book number 1, it really picks up in book number 2, where not only does the main character now have the stronghold in these places that he's built with his group, according to like the RPG mechanics in this new world and this like RPG world now, but he's expanding his influence and he's expanding his kingdom in that respect. And sometimes that's well received by the other survivors, sometimes it's not. And there's conflicts, both social and physical and combat. There still is a good monster fighting. There's a bit of dungeon diving, not as much as probably in book number 1, but there's other types of conflicts that are definitely exposed here. And I personally thought the kingdom building was really done well, and that social aspect was nice. And even though this novel again is like over 450 pages, it really goes by quickly. And I think that's always a mark of nice, enjoyable, well-paced story. So for me, had a good time with it. Easy review, 7.6 out of 10. Had a good time with it. That Shadow Sun expansion with a score of 7.6 out of 10. And next is going to be NPC Lives, book number 1, Tales from the Dead Man Inn, written by Daniel Schienehofen. It is 347 pages, $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Tales from the Dead Man Inn is an anthology set in Alpha World. These collected stories cover well-known and loved characters as well as some lesser-seen NPCs. And there's a whole list of like all the actual names of the stories and like a brief description of who they include and what it kind of is. So I actually really like that about this particular novel script, because sometimes it's just like, oh, what's the next one going to be? And I personally do the same thing when I do take notes on a story. It's like I'll list them individually and kind of judge them. Full disclosure again, I received an advanced copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. Again, I get advanced copies from authors sometimes just because they know I'm busy and I kind of have to like schedule my reading time weeks and months in advance sometimes. Okay. All the short stories in this collection are again written by the same author and set in the same universe, the Alpha World universe. So if you like that series and you like this author, you're probably going to like this right off the bat, because the characters are uniformly following the rules. There's like with a bunch of like different authors trying to contribute and make their own spins on things. It's one author, same universe of characters. Some of the stories are actually set before the main storyline, and some are set during different periods, or they cover longer stretches of the story. But they're like alternative perspectives inside adventures. I think most people who like that series are going to enjoy this. If you like short stories, of course. And some of these stories aren't actually that short. Like the first story in this is probably like 23% of this novel, and on the whole, it's like 347 pages, which is not exactly a short collection in of itself. For me, whether I liked an individual short story kind of depended upon what character was featured and how I felt about them. If it's a character I knew from the main series, like Bob or Skippy, who's the antagonist for a lot of the story, a lot of that series, I had a really good time because I got to see like their personal backstory, some of their own perspectives, the little side adventures they did, or in the case of Skippy, the antagonist, just how big of a jerk he really is, and his jerk perspective and the background stuff that happened outside of like the view of the main characters in that story. There were also like a nice little selection of romances with fade to black kind of sex stuff. And some of them were good. But at some point, some of them were like, I don't really know this character or remember them or really care. And so the romance was less impactful. And I was like, okay, this is just kind of an okay story. Nothing was ever badly written. It's just like, oh, I didn't have attachment to characters to kind of make me want to like continue reading. Sometimes I read them all, I did, but sometimes it's like, oh, I'm reading this to see if it turns out better and not just like, oh, this is super awesome, which was the case in some other stories. Like, and like in every short story collection, I think this is always in the case where you're not going to like all of them. Sometimes you're going to fall in love with some of them, and some are just like, oh, this is fine. But again, that's kind of the charm of a short story collection, that you don't have to, you're not really devoting a ton of time to each and any one story. So if you don't like one, that's fine. You spent 10 minutes reading it, and you can move on to another one that you may really enjoy and like a lot more. So while not every short story in this collection worked for me, overall, I think it's a good collection of stories, especially if you're a fan of the Outworld series. So for me, it gets a score of 7.2 out of 10. I had a good time with it. That's going to be NPC Lives, A Tales from the Dead Man Inn, with a score of 7.2 out of 10. And next we have Invasion, book number 1, A Second Chance, written by Vasily Mihenko. This is 521 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. More Barliona adventures from the best-selling author of The Way of the Shaman LitRPG series. Reality is cruel. The rising level of technological development has led to a rising level of unemployment. They're laying off everybody, from teachers to technical servicemen. What's the point of holding onto a person if they can be replaced by an advanced mechanism? But what are the people to do? How are they to live? Where are they going to get money from? There is only one answer: Barliona. The official government project is gathering steam, luring more and more people into its net. Who knows how people will behave when losing everything? Brody West is one such person. Unlike most, he doesn't lose heart. A professional project manager with 30 years in the business simply cannot do that. He has a goal and a clear understanding of how to achieve it. Nobody can get in his way, not the new class, not the strange fiend, and not the unexpected foes. So there we go. Full disclosure, I received a copy review. I purchased a copy when it became available. Here we go. Honestly, this novel really reminded me of Way of the Shaman in the first book. Not in that it's like set up the exact same way, like the tone of the story. The first book is very much a smaller beginner story. I'm not going to say it's a solo adventure, but it's pretty close to it. There's not like that large, huge group, like guild stuff happening at this point in the story. I'm sure it's going to pop up later. But in this first book, it's really a much smaller story. The main character is a person who's been fired and replaced by an AI worker. He gets a new job. But one of the requirements for that new job is that he has to play Barliona, the Fiverr game, which is the same game that The Way of the Shaman is set in. As a new player, he gets stuck in this training location, and he has a class and race he's not sure that he wants. Again, much like the beginning of The Way of the Shaman series. But the main character makes the most of it, and he gets caught up in some very unique storylines related to the latest race addition to Barliona, the Tieflings, which is kind of a half-demon race. And you get to see lots of good training in the story. You get to see lots of good action adventure. In this story, unlike the Way of the Shaman series, there actually is a real-life storyline. Like, the main character isn't like a prisoner and he's trapped or anything. So you actually get some back and forth. This is going to be like tiny bit spoilery, but I think there are some connections to the main Way of the Shaman series, especially with one particular side character. And I think this might be like a series thing that they're going to eventually reveal it. But I'm like, I think that's a character from the main series, from the Way the Shaman series, but they're not naming them, and they're like doing an intentional thing, like, oh, the AI is not letting them talk about themselves. But I'm like, oh, I'm super curious about who that character is. It's one of those things that might draw you into like continuing everything and like looking for extra bits of like Easter eggs to figure it out. If you figure it out though, please message me. I would like to know if my hypotheses are correct. But sorry, I got off a tangent. Going back to the main story. The main story is smart. The main character is smart. I actually really like the fact that the main character is bringing in his businessman background in play. I know the author, Vasily Mihenko, and this is not like surprise information. He's talked about it on the author interviews we've done with him, that he is a project manager. That's what he does for his main source of like income and a living. And he's in a bunch of other things as well. But like, so like the main character being a project manager is like, oh, the author is really going to draw on those things. And it was done very well. I really like some of the real life storyline. And this it's actually like this interesting theme of like social rehabilitation that is in this novel. And I think it's an interesting kind of speculative portion of the story where like in the far future when AIs are kind of like replacing everybody and like everybody feels like they're separated in our internet age, extending that out, like how much less sociable are people going to have, how much less sociable skills and interactions are they going to have, and how would society kind of like force people to kind of re-interact because we're social creatures. And I thought it was a very interesting conceptualization, especially how it was applied in game with like particular skills. It was just kind of a fun little side kind of thing that I think is again related to like the author's background as a project manager and like getting people to work together well for the benefit of like the company and the project. So a nice little bit that kind of made this story a little bit different from the Way the Shaman, but also made it enjoyable in a slightly different way. So good stuff there. Oh, and I also like the dancing trap avoiding. So I thought that was pretty funny. Overall, again, fun story. That is again likely to be like the smallest kind of setting of the story in the series. I expect like the Way the Shaman, this to get kind of progressively bigger and bigger and bigger, much like a lot of stories do. So this one might be my favorite in the series, just like the first book in the Way the Shaman is my favorite in that series. But we'll have to wait and see how the story actually goes. This might remain very intimate story. I don't know. I'm just speculating here. But for me, had a good time with the story. Good to score 7.6 out of 10. Invasion, book number 1, A Second Chance. If you're a fan of the Way Shaman series, I think you're going to enjoy this one as well quite a bit. And that's Invasion with the score again, 7.6 out of 10. And next is going to be Still Ain't Dead, The Ex-Wife Odyssey, book number 1, written by J.T. Harrington. It is 231 pages, $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. Rory Quinn is a New York police officer that enjoys chasing women, hard drinking, and beating the crap out of bad guys. He's used to waking up with hangovers that leave most people curled around a toilet. But that all changes after one drunken night of revelry. Instead of a bathroom floor, he wakes up to find he's been dead for 500 years. And if that ain't enough, Verity knew is long gone. Zombies, cataclysmically evil robots, and techno demons seem to be the least of his problems, as they all pale in comparison to his crazy, immortal ex-wife. This is a LitRPG story. So there we go. Nice description. That does actually a really good job of describing most of the main conflicts. This is a sci-fi take on the RPG reincarnation trope. The main character has been dead for hundreds of years and is brought back into a synthetic body with an RPG interface and upgrade system. He's tasked with exploring a dangerous and possibly contaminated Earth surface after the AI lost contact with its creators. While the story starts out fairly earnest and serious, it turns into this quirky slice of life exploration story, looking at what the planet has become after like 500 years, and with a lot of satirical pulls from a bunch of post-apocalyptic films and books. But most of the story really is just like you following the main character as he gets into trouble. He kills his way out of the trouble, and he just goes on these weird kind of quirky exploration journeys. His AI companion is actually a nice little addition in that it creates their relationship is actually really nicely developed. They have this banter between them that feels very natural and is very entertaining. And I will say though that there is a very specific kind of humor in this story, and if it lands with you, I think you're really going to enjoy this. It didn't land with me, unfortunately, and so I still like the story, but I don't think I don't like it as much as if the humor lands with you. So if I think you're actually with this more if you get the jokes and if they just make you laugh. They for some reason just didn't, and then that's just the subjective nature of humor. Not just that the jokes are bad, it's just that it just didn't hit me for some reason. Maybe it was the day, you never know. The RPG stuff in the story. Oh, I forgot. There is one sex scene in the novel, so if that bothers you, it is at about the 42% mark. I think it's played for humor a little bit, but it also is semi-graphic. So if that's going to be an issue for you, just you can skip that little like 5% mark of the story, and you don't really lose anything in the larger context of the story. The RPG stuff exists in this story. It is a LitRPG story. It takes on, again, this kind of sci-fi version of it, though. Main character has a synthetic body. That body has stats that can be upgraded. There are also slots for these mental powers. And there's a class-like module system that gives skills that can be upgraded, and main character can learn skills from either that list for that class or from like his past life. And you see the character sheet of this story fairly regularly. However, I wouldn't call this a crunchy LitRPG story. I'd say on the crunchy scale, it's probably on a scale of like 0, which is no numbers, to 10, which is numbers every single page. It's probably about a 4. On that particular scale. You see, again, the character sheet on a semi-regular basis, fairly regular rather, towards the end of like a chapter. But also you'll see the use of vitality to show like damage to the main character whenever he's in combat. But outside those things, there aren't really a ton of numbers. There is a description of like main character getting upgrades and everything. But that's really like the main character talking to himself or to his AI in that respect. But that happens fairly rarely, which again makes this a very, good LitRPG story in that respect. Overall, I like this story. I do. I like the action. I like the exploration of this sci-fi world. There are some nice little speculative themes of what the world could be in 500 years if like things just went weird and wrong. And I think that they're well thought out as far as like that goes. And again, there is a serious note in the beginning of the story of like the first, I don't know, I'd say 10% of the novel. And it kind of underplays how funny the story is going to be to some people, or at least how funny it tries to be. When I was reading, I was like, oh, that's a joke. But I wasn't laughing. And so I know like some other people who have written reviews like, this is absolutely hilarious and funny action adventure. And I'm like, yeah, I like the action adventure. The humor didn't land with me, but I could see how if the humor landed for you, this would be a much better story for you. For me, I still had a good time with it. I like the action adventure, speculative nature. I like exploring this sci-fi story world. All very entertaining stuff. Good expansion of the RPG powers. They made sense. They're a little overpowered in some instances, but it made logical sense on how they're developed. So that's always good. And again, if you like the humor, if the humor lands with you, you're gonna like this probably a lot more than I did. So for me, it gets a score of 7.1 out of 10. I had a good time with it still. That Still Ain't Dead, the Ex-Wife Odyssey, book number 1, with a score of 7.1 out of 10. Okay, next one is The Roll Dungeon, book number 1, A New Dungeon Mind. Book number 1, A New Dungeon Mind. There we go. I forgot to put who the author is. It is Christian Alex Bernstein. Bernstein. It is 60 pages. It's a short story, $1.49 to purchase, available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. This is a living dungeon LitRPG. A new dungeon mind is born and seeks a free space to dig in, grow, make dungeons, eat people, what dungeon minds do, basically. This one, Lisco, finds a place with a forest, a lake, an old abbey, and a town nearby that promises lots and lots of food from dying adventurers. Dying in the dungeon he is going to make. And ... Short and sweet version of this review, essentially, this is a dungeon core story. It is not a LitRPG story, and the two aren't necessarily connected all the time. A lot of dungeon core stories are LitRPG stories because they have an RPG progression system, whether it's for the dungeon itself or the larger world. This does not have an RPG progression system, though, which is a little weird, especially considering how much the author is saying this is LitRPG. It might be something that the author plans to add in the future. Again, this feels like a short story, the first part of a longer short story, like serial story. But in this short story novel, no. The dungeon core story itself isn't also particularly good. it does have a core. That plans a dungeon and spawns monsters, which is the basic, premise of any dungeon core story. But it doesn't actually feel like a complete story. It feels like the beginning of something that might or might not be good at some point. But right now, this portion of it is just like, oh, it feels like not even the beginning setup of a longer dungeon story. It feels like, oh, this is like the start. So it feels very unfinished in some respects. But again, it is technically a dungeon core story. It just isn't LitRPG. There are also some weird technical writing issues where, for some reason, all the paragraphs are just one or two sentences long, and then there's a double space between them, which for me was like really made it challenging to read this, right? Because it broke up the flow of like my vision as I'm scanning. It's like sentence, two line jumps, and then like another sentence or two, and then 2 line jumping. I'm like, oh, that's a choice. So looking at the author's other works, this story kind of feels like it's this particular kind of right to market story, where it's like the author releases a bunch of like short stories, and just kind of expands the story. It's almost like they have a long story that kind of cut up into pieces, and they just like piecemeal release them. And I'm like, okay, that's definitely a choice, and again, valid about that. That's a completely valid decision, the way to publish, and it works very well for some people. But for me, it didn't work, mostly because, again, this isn't actually a lit RPG story. So that's probably my biggest issue with this. And again, that might be just because that stuff comes in later, but I can only judge about what's here. So Dungeon World, book number one, the new Dungeon Mind with score 4 out of 10. Not actually lit RPG. Not even a particularly good dungeon core story either. And that's it for the show, ladies and gentlemen. All 5 LitRPG reviews, all done. Remember, folks, you can follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, on Patreon, and our webpage at litrpgpodcast.com, where we have a whole huge database of all the LitRPG reviews we've done for the past, I think it's going to be almost 4 years at some point pretty soon. And of course, we have some other pages where we have groups of people where you can hang out and chat and talk with LitRPG authors. And of course, if you want to support the podcast in any way, shape, or form, you can find all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. But again, the big way to help support us is go buy Project Alpha Book 2. Either it's an ebook or it's an audiobook. I can tell you that the funds from that particular book definitely help pay for this podcast, in addition to all the other ways that you readers and listeners help support us. But until we can hang out again, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me or to listen to me talk about this genre I love, LitRPG, and for commenting on the comment section. I love having conversations with you guys, hearing what you guys think about the same books I'm talking about, the same reviews. I've actually gotten some great recommendations from readers as well. I can't read everything anymore, unfortunately. So if you guys ever have something that you think is cool and you have a review for, and as long as you're not the author giving the review for your novel, but if you're an actual reader who just something I missed or something I haven't reviewed, feel free to drop me a line and we'll take a look at the review, and if we like it, I'll pop it up on the show as a fan review, and we'll give you full accreditation for that particular review. So thanks a lot, and again, thank you for hanging out with me today. And until we can hang out again, folks, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.